Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today it's Friday and this means it's video time. We're starting today with a new series, which will cover the topic infrastructure as code. And we have the first session today, and the session will cover the topic ARM development. But before we go a little bit deeper about the agenda and the details from today, I want to give you a short introduction about me. My name is Lagler-Gruener. I am a multi-cloud architect in one of the biggest consulting companies in Austria. I'm working with the public cloud, with the public hyperscaler from the public cloud since 2012. And at the beginning, I'm focusing on Microsoft Azure, and over the time, I'm realizing it's a good idea to go more broader and also specializing into AWS and GCP too. You can find my social profile on Facebook, Twitter, Xing, LinkedIn, and so on. I have for sure my private blog called cloudblogger.at, my YouTube channel, and if you want, and if you're looking for source code like PowerShell scripts, like a finished solution, you can also find my GitHub repo if you want. You can see I have different certification, for sure the most certifications in Microsoft Azure. I have also certifications in AWS and GCP too. Since 1 month, I'm also a Microsoft Azure MVP, so I'm really happy about the graduation and looking forward for the future, which will give maybe interesting parts from the MVP community. Okay, so let's go ahead. Let's talk about the agenda, the topic from today. Today we will cover the topic Azure ARM Development. This is a session from video category level 400. And from video type full session. So the video will take approx 35 up to 40 minutes. Okay, let's go to the agenda from the day. First of all, we will discuss about why infrastructure as code. Why is it important to use or to have a goal in your cloud journey, which is infrastructure as code. Then we go one step further and talk about the ARM template structure and also what are ARM templates. Then I will give you an idea about the development or the deployment options which you have in ARM for ARM templates. Then we'll switch to my demo environment. I want to show you a real life use case to deploy virtual machines in the Azure cloud. And then we go back to the series session and talk about ARM template best practices. What are my best practices? What are best practices from Microsoft? And at the end, the vNext scenario when you think about infrastructure as code. Okay, so let's go ahead. Why infrastructure as code? The why, it's really easy to answer. Because you have to implement standardization. So when you have a bigger environment in your Azure environment, the first thing about your governance is you have to define naming standard. You have to define security options. And when you think about infrastructure as code, you developed those functionalities like naming standard, security functionalities in your templates, and you can reuse those functionalities. If you have a recurrence of some tasks, you also can think about infrastructure as code because it's a cost and for sure time saving options what you have. When you develop infrastructure as code, think about you have to develop in chunks, into chunks. So you build your resource library, and at the end you have a bigger and bigger resource library, and when you get a requirement and project requirement, you can choose the different chunks from your resource library and have a much faster development and deployment. Many of my customers will talk to me and say, okay, Hannes, what can we deploy? What can we develop in infrastructure as code? The answer is really simple, everything. So in Microsoft Azure, you have the option to develop everything in infrastructure as code. Today we will cover the Microsoft Azure perspective, so ARM templates, but you have also the ability to develop resources in Azure Active Directory over PowerShell, over REST API, and for sure also in Office 365, I'm sorry. Okay, that's why. Now let's talk about what ARM templates are. An ARM template is a JSON file which is passed to the Azure Resource Manager. What the hell is the Azure Resource Manager? The Azure Resource Manager is the middle tier from Microsoft Azure. So every time when you say in the Azure Portal, please deploy a virtual machine, it creates an ARM template and JSON based ARM template and give the ARM template the resource manager and say, hey, deploy those resources. So this is the reason why we have to develop resources in ARM template in JSON format. Every time you have also the ability to deploy resources over a PowerShell module. Every time when you execute a command like new ACVM, you're writing the command and it will transfer it into an ARM template because the Azure Resource Manager only understands ARM or JSON-based ARM templates. It's a declarative infrastructure as code template. It's also important for the development perspective. And it defines resources that are to be deployed. And keep in mind, every time when you define your resource inside your ARM template, you have to define your resource provider. You can see in the table on the bottom, the most important or the often used resource provider. For example, if you want to deploy a virtual machine in Azure, you can choose or have to choose the resource provider Microsoft Compute/virtual machines. If you want to deploy a virtual network, you have to define the resource provider named Microsoft.network/virtual networks. When you develop infrastructure as code or ARM templates, you have to define your input parameters, you can define variables and for sure output parameters. Okay, so let's have a look to the structure of ARM templates. An ARM template have always the same structure. You have fixed, you have static, you have required sections, you have optional sections. One of the required section is, for example, the schema. You have to define the schema version. You have to define the content version. This is the content version of your template itself, so you can choose the version number. You have the option to use the API profile. Parameters is also an optional section. Variables is an optional section. Functions and required section is for sure the resource section. And inside the resource section, you can define your resources itself. And if you want, you can also define outputs from your ARM template to give the information to maybe the next ARM template if you plan to develop a nesting resource template structure. ARM templates are normally or typically defined into two files. The first file is the template file itself, and if you have parameters in your template file, you can also define your parameter file. You have the ability to define template nesting, so you can write your template and inside the template you can define a second template. So when you deploy the template, you can see, okay, the first template is deployed and then a second template will be executed. There are some reasons to do this, so we will cover this in the live demo. If you want to develop into chunks, so you have, for example, for your virtual machine, a separate template and you want to execute the chunk from the main template, you can define linked templates. This means, okay, you have stored your template to a storage account, and you can reference inside your main template to a chunk template from your storage account, for example. From my point of view, better option is you can also define template specs. So there's a separate area in Azure available where you can define your template specs, also with your version number, and inside your template, your main template, you can say, okay, I want to deploy a VM. Please use the template spec X, Y, Z to deploy the resource. Okay, so now we have the structure. Now we want to have a look to the resource definition. So here you can see a really simple resource definition. It's from the resource provider Microsoft.network/network security group. So this resource definition deploy a resource group, not a resource group, a network security group, I'm sorry. You have the type definition, this is the resource provider. You have to choose an API version from the resource provider, from exactly that resource provider. So there are different API versions available. Microsoft will update the resource provider, and you have the ability to choose the newer version. You have to define the name for the network security group. In this case, I'm using a variable. This is the syntax when you want to choose a variable inside the ARM template. The location is pretty interesting. So you can define the location where the network security groups should be deployed. And in this case, we are using a variable, and the variable is depending on the resource group where we want to deploy the network security group. So we are using the resource group dot location, and this is every time the same. So when you deploy to a network security group, to a resource group, we always choose the resource group location from the resource group. And at the end, it depends on the resource provider. We have different property options. Okay, so that's about the ARM template, the role definition. So let's think about what kind of options do we have to deploy those templates. First of all, we can choose the Azure Portal for sure. So there is in the marketplace, you can find the service named template deployment, and you can choose the service, create a new template, choose your template. So you can define your template in the template editor and have the ability to deploy your template or give your template structure to the Azure Resource Manager. You have for sure the option to deploy from the template specs. It's also a good idea. Next, you have the ability to use PowerShell commands. So you can choose new EC group deployment, resource group deployment. This is the command, and give the command itself the link or the URL to the ARM template and also the parameter file. If you're more comfortable with CLI or with the Linux perspective, you can also choose for sure the Azure CLI. When we develop an application, we can also develop or also deploy from those applications developed in .NET, Java, Python, Node.js, PHP, Ruby, and so on. We have also the ability to talk with the Azure Resource Manager over a separate REST API and give the REST API the ARM template. And from my point of view, the best option what you have is a CI/CD pipeline. You can choose to deploy resources, the Azure DevOps service or GitHub Actions if you want. Okay, so that's from the first part, from the first theory part. We are now going to the live demo. We will cover the following topics. First of all, we create a template step by step to deploy an Azure VM. I will also cover the topic, okay, what should we do with the password? When you deploy an Azure VM, you always have to define a password, and to add the password inside the ARM template is not really the best idea. And then we will cover the following when we have the VM deployed. Okay, we have an empty VM. We should configure the VM. We should maybe install an IIS, configure the IIS, change the firewall settings. What kind of options do we have in the Azure cloud? Okay, so let's switch to the live demo and we'll cover the topics here. Okay, we are now in my demo environment. You can see I've opened the Visual Studio Code. When we start to develop ARM templates, I always recommend to install 2 extensions. One extension is the Azure Resource Manager extension, and the second one is the ARM template viewer. The Azure Resource Manager gives you the ability to use code snippets for ARM development, and the ARM template view is a good add-on to view to get a graphical view about your components. We will see it a little bit later. Okay, so let's start with the first code snippet. So when we want to create a new ARM template, we have to add the ARM command and tap on tab, and you have the basic structure in place for your ARM template. On the top you can see I have defined a schema with the latest version, the content version, which I can choose. I can also upgrade for new version, parameters section, functions section, variables, resources, and also outputs. Okay, when we start to develop an ARM template, we have to think about what kind of parameters do we need. In my environment, I've defined 2 parameters. One parameter for deployment type and the second parameter for VM name. So let's have a look to the deployment type parameter. You can see I have defined a type from type string. We also have a default value in place, so every time when we execute the ARM template, we have to we can choose a new parameter. If no parameter is chosen, always the default parameter is in place. Then we have allowed values, so we have here an array list for full deployment and network only deployment, and at the end we can define a metadata section where we can add a description to give more information about the parameter and why we have to define the parameter. The second parameter is my VM name. It's also from type string. I've also defined a default value, a minimum length, a maximum length, and for sure also my metadata, including my description. Okay, that's about my parameters. Let's go ahead and define the first resource. When we think about Azure VM, Azure VM have a minimum of 3 components. One component is the VM configuration itself, so it includes the VM size, includes also the configuration about the networking stuff and so on. Then we have a separate component for the network card, so the internal network card. Then we have also a component for the virtual machine VHD disk. So these are the 3 minimum components for a new virtual machine. But in our case, we want to develop, or we also want to deploy the networking stuff, and then we can start with a network security group. So when we want to deploy a network security group, we also have the ability to choose a code snippet. So we can select ARM minus network security group NSG. So let's select the snippet and click on tab, and then you have a template included as inside your ARM template for network security group. You can see on the top the name for the network security group, the type. This is the Azure resource provider. You can see Microsoft.network, network security group. You can see here the latest API, the latest public available API, the location, and here you have the option, you can also hard code your location, but in this case I'm always using the resource group location. And then we have the properties, and here the network security rules. Okay, so that's about the network security group. I want to change something. First of all, I want to add my security rule. I have defined a security rule for my environment, and I want to replace this one here. And now it's correct. So I have this changes here. So you can see here I have my name, HTTP allow, and here are the settings from the priority 110. Okay. Then I want to define a name, and think about many components in Azure need a unique name. To achieve this, you can define a unique name, but I want to show you the option what you have with functions. So I've developed a separate functions to define or to generate a new unique name for each resource. So in this case, I'm adding the function. You can see the namespace for the function is function demo, and we have also one member, and this is the function itself, the unique name, which requires one parameter, is the name prefix, and give an output from a concat. We're using concat to lower the parameter itself and a unique string, and the unique string is based on the resource group ID. Okay. Cool thing. So now we can choose the function. I'm always using variables. In this case, I want to generate a new variable name for my network security group. So you can see network security group NSGVE, frontend NSGVE name. And here you can see I'm using the namespace function demo and the function unique name with the parameter NSG frontend VE. Okay, so I have now my variable in place, and I want to use the variable. I'm removing the hard-coded name and select the variables and choosing the right one. Okay, I have now my variable in place, and the network security group is finished configured. So, okay, so we have the network security group. Let's think about the next component. The next component that we have to develop is a virtual network. So let's choose virtual network, VNet, use the template, and you can see here it's much more. We have to add a separator here. So we have here the second, the same thing, my name, my network, resource provider, Microsoft.network, the same from the network security group, but here we have the sub area virtual network, the latest version, the location. We have also add tags. In this case, we don't need tags. We remove this section. We have here our address space and our subnets. In this case, I'm only want to add one subnet. Okay, so let's go ahead and define a custom and unique name for my virtual network. I'm choosing a separate variable for virtual network, also using the function with the unique name and with the parameters VNet VE. I'm changing the name here and select the right variable. Okay, so let's go ahead and change something in the configuration itself. The address prefix is okay, but I want to change the name from a subnet to frontend, and also assign a network security group to my subnet, to exactly that subnet. And here's a separate command called network security groups. And here we have the ability to add, I'm sorry for that, so this, I'm sorry, not here. So we have to add here inside a separate comment with network security group and an array. Okay, and then we have to define an ID for my network security group. And that's a little bit tricky. So we have to add the network security group from the top. And here we can choose the following comment. Resource ID. So we want to reference to an existing resource ID. Resource ID. Then Microsoft Network Security Groups. Then the variable. And that's it. So now we have selected the network security group, which we have developed on the top. But now it's an important part. We have to add a dependency, because normally the Azure Resource Manager template will provision both resources together at the same time. Now we have to say, okay, let's wait to develop to deploy the virtual network until the network security group was deployed. So in this case, I'm defining and depends on, and also select the network security group West Europe, because it's important, because we have here a reference what we have to what we need for the network security group. Okay, great. Now we have our virtual network in place. Then we have to go one step further. In this case, we are developing a virtual machine, including a public IP address. So we are defining a public IP. Okay, we are using here ARM template minus IP. This is our snippet, our code snippet. Same situation, Microsoft .network, the resource provider, but in this case the public IP address section. We are creating a unique name for the public IP address. So we are using the function once more, the Azure function. We are changing the name to the variable. That's not the right one. So we are using the public IP. The location is correct. We don't need tags in this case. We are using a dynamic IP address, a dynamic public IP address, and we also have to define a network DNS label. In this case, we are using the same, so variables and the public IP address name. Okay, awesome. So we don't need a dependency because it's a separate resource. We don't need a dependency. So let's go ahead. And now we think about the network interface. So we are saying, okay, each virtual machine have 3 components. One component is the virtual the network interface. The second component is the VM configuration. And the third component is the OS disk itself. So let's go ahead and say ARM network interface NIC. And this is my template for my network interface. We will also select or define a separate, a unique name for the network interface. In this case, VNet the NIC 01 with the unique name. I will change this to my variable and also select here NIC name. The rest is okay, so we have to remove the tags. We don't need the tag in this case. Now we have to add a dependency because we have to depend on a virtual network. So in this case, we are using our virtual network for dependency. Then we have to change something inside the configuration itself. The IP configuration 01 is okay, the name. So we are using a dynamic IP address, and now we have to reference to a virtual network. In this case, we are referencing to our variables VNet West Europe, and in this case to our subnet named frontend. This is our right configuration. Okay, so okay, and the second thing what we have to assign is the public IP address. So in this case, we are going ahead and select here the public IP address. We want to assign the public IP address. This one here. So I'm selecting the public IP address, and here we also have the ID option, and also want to reference to an existing resource ID. In this case, I'm using the public IP address, and in this case, my public IP address name. Okay, great. So we have now the public IP address assigned to the network interface and also assigned the right subnet. In this case, we also have to reference a dependency to my public IP address. So we have to wait till the virtual network and the public IP address was finished deployed, then we can start with the network interface. Okay, so let's go ahead. We have now our network stuff in place, but I also have defined on the top an option and parameter option from the condition-based deployment type. In this case, I want to add a condition to my network interface and also to my public IP address, because we want to switch between the network deployment and also the VM deployment. In this case, I'm not this one here, I'm sorry. I'm adding a condition and I'm choosing the function equals, and I'm selecting the parameter named deployment type, and in this case I'm using full deployment. When we are selecting full deployment in our parameter section, we also deploy this option here. And at the end we have to define a separator. Okay, and the same from here I'm using on my network interface. Okay, so we have now the network configuration in place. We also have the basic VM configuration in place. Let's go ahead and develop an VM. So in this case, I'm using my finished configuration, copy paste. You can see it's much longer. So I have here many options configured. First of all, here also the condition deployment, then the resource provider, Microsoft resource.deployments. Okay, why? The reason for that is I'm using here a nested deployment. Interesting. So here is the name for the nested deployment. Here also the dependencies. The dependency is the network interface, so you have to wait till the network interface is in place. And we have to define the properties, what kind of mode we use, in this case incremental, and also the scope inner. And here you can see I'm using the same schema. I have here my schema, I have my content version, my parameters. Okay, why I use here a nested template? The reason for that is security. That are the passwords. I don't want to use, I don't want to add a password to my template file. And this is one option what you have. You can select, you can create an Azure Key Vault, add the Azure Key Vault, add to the Azure Key Vault your secrets, and say, hey, use the Azure Key Vault, also the secret XYZ. Here you can find the admin password. I've done this, so you can see here my parameter section for my nested template. And here you can see I have admin user, so this is fixed, this is okay. I have here my admin password, and this is a reference to an Azure Key Vault. And here you can see the ID is the resource ID, subscription ID, resource group. I have to add in the same resource group my Key Vault, and the Key Vault have the name ARM Demo and the secret name for admin password. Okay, so let's have a look to the Azure Portal. So here we have our resource group for this live demo, and here you can see I have my ARM Demo Azure Key Vault, and inside the ARM Demo Key Vault you can see I have two secrets. One secret is for the VM admin password. One important part, when you deploy ARM templates, you have to say, hey, the ARM template service have ability to access to the Azure Key Vault. You have to go to the access policy and select Azure Resource Manager for template deployments. So we have enabled the access for the Azure Resource Manager. Okay, this is the only thing what you have to do. Okay. So we have here the ARM template. We have here a reference to my Key Vault. So let's go ahead and let's have a look to my parameters. You can see here the username and the password, and the password is a secure string. Okay, now we can go to the resource itself, and here we have the right resource provider, microsoft.compute/virtual machine, with the right API version, with the name is coming from the parameter section, the resource group, the hardware profile. In this case, it's not the best idea to hard code the VM size. I recommend to also use a drop down or a parameter section to select the right hardware size. Then we have here our OS storage profile. In this case, it's an OS disk, so this is the name. It's concat from the parameter server name, including the OS disk. Okay, From image, in this case, we are using a managed disk from type premium LLS. And here's the image reference. So we are using the publisher Microsoft Windows Server. They offer Windows Server, and the SKU we are installing a Server 2016 data center from the latest version. From the networking perspective, we are having the add the parameter for the nickname. In this case, we are referencing to the resource ID Microsoft.network with network interfaces and using the nickname. And at the end, you can see here the OS profile, the computer name is also a parameter, and here the admin user and the admin password for the VM itself. Okay, we have now an empty VM. It's okay, it's nice, but we have to configure an VM. We have to see, okay, what kind of options do you have to configure, to deploy a VM and also configure the VM. We can choose for sure a custom image. It's always possible. You can design your custom image, build your custom image and save it to the Azure cloud and can choose it. But keep in mind, you have also you have to patch the VM image when you design it from scratch. From my point of view, the better option is choose the pre-configured, the Microsoft Windows image. It's in the most situation patched. There are maybe some patches open, 2 or 3 patches, but it's a good idea to choose this and choose desired state configuration, PowerShell desired state configuration to configure your VM. Why PowerShell desired state configuration? Because it's free. You can deploy an Azure Automation account. In this case, I have here my Azure Automation account. And inside my Azure Automation account, I have a desired state configuration. And in this case, I have here a configuration file, a configuration deploy IIS, and also a compiled configuration. Great. We develop, we deploy the VM, and we say, hey, when it's finished, please use a separate extension to register the VM in Azure Automation DSC. We can achieve this by a separate resource. You can see here, I have here a resource from type extension. And the name is Microsoft PowerShell DSC from this version. The location is, in this case, resource group .location. It depends on, for sure, the virtual machine itself. It's from publisher Microsoft PowerShell from type DSC. This is the handle version. Auto upgrade to minor version, for sure true. Now we have to add a DSC key. In this case, I have a separate parameter from the DSC key. And the DSC key is the same like a password, so we have to save the DSC key to Azure Key Vault. And now we have to add a parameter DSC URL. And at the end, we have to select the configuration, the compiled configuration. You can see here deploy IIS.web server configuration. And here you can see I have 2 variables, configuration mode frequency in minutes and refresh frequency in minutes. When we go ahead, when we go up to the configuration part, you can see here I have a separate variable section with those settings in place. Okay. So, from the DSC key, we have here a separate separate parameter, also a reference to an Azure Key Vault, and here the ARM demo Azure Key Vault and the DSC key secret. When we have a look to the Key Vault itself, we have a second secret, and this is the DSC key. So what we have to define is the DSC URL. We have a variable in this case. So we have to define here a separate variable with the name DSC URL, and where you can find the DSC URL. It's pretty simple. So let's go back to our resource group, select the Azure Automation account because we want to assign, or we want to define the DSC, the computer to the DSC publishing server. In this case, we are selecting keys here, and here you can find the DSC URL. Copy the URL, paste the URL. You can also add the URL if you want to the Azure Key Vault, and that's it. Now we have a full, complete ARM template deployment in place. We are deploying condition-based and the networking stuff, private IP address, public IP address, network security group, virtual network, and nested deployment with a secure key for the username, for the password, and for the DSC key, a virtual machine. We also automatically install an extension to add the virtual machine to the DSC configuration and configure the VM configure the VM with an IIS, and you have also IIS installed and also your configuration installed. Okay, so let's have a look to the deployment scenario. In this case, I'm having here a template specs. It's the same template which we have developed here. So you can see here the V1 version. Click on edit, and you can see here our template. It's really the same. It's the same template which we have developed right now. And let's go to the deploy section here. Select what kind of deployment type, in this case a full deployment, and the VM name, in this case ARM VM demo 01, and click on create and review. The template will be validated, and click on create, and the deployment is now given to the Azure Resource Manager, and you can see here there are many resources available. In this case, the network security group was deployed, the public IP address, the network itself, the virtual network, the network interface, and now the nested template is starting JSON deploy with custom secrets. And let's have a look to the separate template, to the nested template. Here you can see the VM is deployed. It takes nearly 1 minute, and now we are registering the VM in DSC. Let's have a look to the input parameters. You can see here the admin user, the VM password, is a secure string. The nickname, the DSC URL, and the DSC key is also not available because it's a secure string. Okay, this process will take some minutes because the DSC will take some time to configure the VM finish, and when we are finished, we have a look to the resources itself. Okay, the deployment is now finished. So let's have a look. You can see everything is green. So let's go back to the deployment itself. You can see here we have the different options, and it will take around 5 minutes to finish deploy the application. So let's have a look to the resource itself. You can see here we have the different services. We have our VM, we have our OS disk, we have the network interface, the network security group, the public IP address, and the virtual network. All resources are in place. And let's have a look to the DSC configuration. So we can see here inside the state configuration, we have a new node. In this case, ARM Demo 01, it's compliant. The node configuration is the deploy IIS web configuration. And when we have a look to the configuration itself, we can see here, okay, we have a feature installed, in this case, a web server, and we also installed .NET. And we also execute a script to disable the internal firewall. Okay, normally when we browse now to the VM, we should see the basic login, the basic screen for our web server. We have defined here a custom DNS name. So let's copy this, paste it here, and voila. It's a finished IIS installed on the VM, so we can we can use the IIS on the VM. Okay, awesome. So we are now finished with the live demo. Let's switch back to the presentation. Cool stuff. We are ready. We are finished with the live demo. Everything is working fine. So let's talk about the best practices. My recommendation, think carefully about what you need to provision. Then consider deployment chunks for reusability. Consider a uniform naming schema for sure. So this is a part also from the Azure governance stuff. Do not use too many input and output parameters or variables. Versioning and documentation is always required. It's also important. Using linked templates or template specs, I recommend using template specs. Secrets have to keep outside. Every time when you have secrets, think about place the secrets into Azure Key Vault and use template nesting with references to your Azure Key Vault. Keep in mind you have to select the ability for the Azure Resource Manager to use the Azure Key Vault. Consider deployment environment. Think about, okay, what kind of development environment want to use. I recommend use Visual Studio Code. It's also available in Visual Studio. It's depending on your environment. And every time before you go to the production, testing. That's my best practices. So I think about every time when I develop an ARM template, I always think about each topic here. Okay, what are the VNext? There are different options available. So when you think about developing for Azure native, so only you have a Azure native strategy, think about Azure Biceps. Azure Biceps is the new version. I see here it's a typo, it's not with Z, it's with C, Biceps. Think about Azure Biceps. You can see here a small screenshot. I've developed the same procedure. On the left side is the ARM template, on the right side is the same from Azure Bicep. We will cover this in the next session. And when you think about multi-cloud strategies, go to the Terraform option. So with Terraform, you have the ability to develop for Azure, for AWS, for GCP, and maybe for on-premise scenarios too. Okay, that's it. That's from from the session from today. I hope you like the session. I hope you can reuse the session. You can find all resources, all code resources on my GitHub repository for sure. I will also add the link to the comment on the bottom. Have fun, think about my best practices, think about Azure Biceps when you develop Azure Native, Terraform for multi-cloud. See you in my next session. Bye.